Hey everybody, Jay Weidner, Reality Check. Thanks for watching and help me get to 40,000. Can't get there yet, but we're trying. Um, I do want to tell you that I'm making two films over the next the rest of this year. Two more documentaries. Finally returning after 5 year hiatus from making films, and I'm looking really forward to that. All right, without further ado, let's get to our guest. She was here before. She's back again, as I promised. Jane Evershed. She's an artist, a great artist. She's dedicated her life to trying to get people to be creative as much as possible and returning back into a more creative world as the age of Aquarius, comes in here and I'm with her on that 100%. Hey Jane, how you doing?
Oh, fantastic. I'm super excited about today. So
Me
I've
too.
discovered some incredible things that you would never attach or even think of attaching to prehistory. So I looked at the cave art. After doing the Renaissance, I thought, wait a minute, let me go check out that cave art. Oh my goodness, what I found, Jay.
Yeah, so let's take it from the beginning. I've always been super fascinated by the art that's found in northern Spain and southern France. Let's see if I can show it. Hang on one second. Sure. Can you see the cave art?
I can, I recognize that
All right,
absolutely. I
so
could
this is
name.
this is Lascaux in France. You really can't visit this anymore. They don't allow any visitors in, but you can see it's pretty spectacular art for, I think they're dating it at 30,000 years ago, I believe, right?
When they started out, they were saying 65,000, but then it changed to 30.
All
And they've got
right.
so many replicas now that you can't go and authenticate anything anymore. So
Yeah,
what
well,
they've done is they took ancient cave art, which they call ancient, and they brought it into the 21st century to make it look cool.
all right. You got the floor. My audience will be held in rapture, I'm sure, with what you're about to relate. Let's start it from the beginning. Where do we start with your story?
Well, actually, the best starting place is to start with leaving the Renaissance and going straight into the end of the Renaissance is when the Illuminati was founded. And
Hmm.
I believe that the Illuminati took over from where the Roman Catholic Church left off because
Mm.
the Roman Catholic Church had become so repugnant because they had caused so many bloody wars. They killed 500,000 Cathars in the south of France.
Yes, they did.
And this is very connected to the cave paintings. So we have to go to Adam Weishaupt, who was a Bavarian that started the Illuminati, and then it was the Illuminati that started the world fairs. And the world fairs, of course, you know that the technology was so marvelous that they had during Tartaria, and anything that they had in the fairs was nothing compared to the technology that they had during Tartaria, but they were selling their wares there as far back as 1798, and they were mostly in Paris, and they were like 13 in a row. But what they were selling there too in the background behind all these great products, like for instance, lawnmowers and toothpaste started there,
Yep.
but in the background they were selling this prehistoric jargon, and they were trying to tell people that they came from apes
Hmm.
because they needed them to be little. They needed humans to never realize that they were going to ascend,
Yep.
and they needed them to think that they had come so far by just evolving to the point that they had evolved at. And also at these fairs, they would have human zoos
Yes,
where
they
they would
did.
show off all these tribes and tribal peoples
Yep.
like some kind of exotic show. And the idea behind that was to connect this primitive lifestyle with the prehistory. So then the colonialists could garner more and more people into their realm of materialism and production, and the industrial first industrial revolution had already occurred, and they were really going on a roll now. Also, another thing that happened that was vital was that in 1917, the Pope then codified and canonized usury. So we've got them all working in lockstep. We've got the Illuminati, we've got Roman Catholic Church hanging back in the background. Okay, this is how far they had to hang back in the background. Everybody couldn't take the Jesuits anymore, so they had all been oppressed. So the Roman Catholic Church comes up with this great idea that they're going to form the Marists. And the Marists were people who worshipped the Virgin Mary.
Right.
And the whole idea was that these guys that belonged to the Marists had to walk around all day long pretending they were the Virgin Mary and behave like her and act like her.
That's funny.
Just the weirdest. Must have been like the earliest drag or something.
Yes. Well,
So
I always wondered about those priests anyway.
yeah, I know. Tell me about them.
Yeah.
So they were selling time and savagery, basically, and they were building their labor force. And then all of a sudden in 1877, bam, we find Altamira, the very first prehistoric cave in the world ever discovered, which the French couldn't put it in France, so they did it in Spain. So it wouldn't look so obvious, I think. And what happened was the man who said he discovered that cave was ridiculed and nobody believed him. He went to his death a sad and disparaged man. And the problem was this one prehistorian, his name was Emile Cartelhac. And I don't know if I'm saying that properly in French, but Cartelhac. And from the pictures I've seen him in, he's standing in all these places where these giant megaliths are. And he's obviously a very studious scholar, true to his word. He's a good man. And he said, no, not buying these caves. And he was also in charge of prehistory at the World Fair at the time too. So they had to put off their little cave art roofs for 22 years until finally they got this guy around. And when he came on board, everything changed.
But weren't there people that had been in those caves earlier and said that there weren't paintings
That
there?
was That's true, Jay, you know your stuff, but that was later in 1956. So that it went on and on and on. There'd be a cave discovery and then big problems, and then a cave discovery, and then so they just let it go, they let it sit. And the reason they kept going at this like a dog on a bone was because they had at the same time they had the Catholic Church had their priests looking at archaeology and skulls and things like that. And at the same time, they had Henri Breuil looking for the cave paintings. So these are two priests from the Roman Catholic Church. And Breuil happened to be one of those Marists.
There was a lot of people looking in that area at that time for the so-called Holy Grail, right?
That is very true too. In fact, that was the Cathars were said to have hidden that Holy
Right.
Grail.
Yeah.
From,
And the Cathars would have occupied these caves. There's just no doubt about it. They were known to be occupiers of caves, and they would have been going into these caves. The Cathars, for those of you who don't know, were a group of people that lived in northern Spain and southern France, the Basque areas, and all through the Languedoc and Provence. And they had a religion which was kind of a Gnostic religion, and women were allowed to be priestesses in the religion. They had hands-on healing ceremonies and didn't believe in a hierarchy. And what happened is that they were growing by leaps and bounds, converting people over to their religion. And the church got a hold of this, and they sent in a bishop, a high-ranking bishop, and they went to Arles, which is a town in south of France, and they had a big debate. And the priest, the bishop, lost the debate against the Cathar and humiliated him. And he went back and told the Pope, and the Pope ordered the army to go in and wipe them all out. That's basically the Cathars. That was the first Inquisition, I believe, and probably the bloodiest of all the Inquisitions.
Well, I would say that the Cathars were not a religion, actually, because
That's
they were
true.
way beyond a religion. They were like tree of life people. They had no possessions, they never tithed.
Yep.
They would, it was Mary's teachings, because Mary had
That's right.
gone to France and she was the apostle to the apostles.
That's right.
And the Catholic Church had always called her a whore and a harlot and all
Yeah.
these things. And so
Yeah,
they
Mary
were,
Magdalene was the originator of the Cathar traditions.
I didn't know that. The way I came to that conclusion was looking at Fomenko again, his new chronology,
Yep.
and he puts Christ at 1100 coming into the world at 11 in the 11th century,
Yeah,
around
11th century.
1056. So
Yeah.
that would put her right there with the Cathars. So
Yeah.
this is why it's so fascinating, Jay, is because this wasn't just about cave paintings. This was about a ritual, a Roman Catholic ritual going on in the very same area in France that the Cathars had been, where all the pilgrimages are still today.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always these hands on the walls
Yeah.
everywhere, and these little hands, these children's hands. So you can determine from that what you will. But when you've got these kind of people who worship skulls and all that kind of thing, you know what you've got going on there, right?
Go ahead, tell
So
me.
what do you want me to explain it?
Yeah,
Well,
go
maybe
for it.
I'll go into a little bit more detail later, because I still want to put the grounding
All right.
behind the full
Fair
story.
enough.
So I came across this old photo of three men standing around a cave. Well, it was about six, but three men stood out, and one was Prince Albert I of Monaco.
Yeah.
The other one was Louis Tener, an artist, and the other one was this Abbé Henri Brule, a Roman Catholic priest. And I looked at this picture, and they're standing around a cave, and I'm thinking, why are these people standing around this cave entrance? And then I just went down the biggest rabbit hole you've ever been down in your life, researching these people, because obviously the Prince Albert of Monaco was a little puppet of the Roman Catholic Church, and he ended up establishing Institute of Archaeology and Paleontology in France. So why would a Spanish monarch be creating? And these institutions, incidentally, were all the usurped Tartarian buildings that they used, so they looked so good, And then the little Catholic Jesuit Henri Brule ended up being called the prehistoric priest. And then the artist was the artist to the Prince of Monaco, and he was said to have gone on all his travels with him and sort of recorded them in an art form. So therefore he was working for the prince. So you'll see that this is the man who I think created the fake art in the three main caves in France, which were Altamira, which was in Spain, Lasso, you called it something else. Lascaux? I call it Lasso. I don't know what the
That could be
correct.
right.
And then Chauvet, which was only
Right.
discovered in 1994. So then you would think immediately, well, that was discovered in 1994. That couldn't have been, them. And I really took a close look at that, because based on that, my whole theory could fall apart.
Right.
And I went and looked back at it, and I saw that they had claimed that 21,000 years ago, there'd been a rock slide that covered the cave. And to me, that just said, No, because they covered the cave up so that it could be discovered later on, and that would be their insurance policy, you know, because that's how they think. And it would be sitting there and it would be aging nicely. You know, remember Michelangelo made all those forgeries in during the Renaissance? It's the same mindset, you know, anything to fool the people.
And why would they fake fake these paintings? What was the purpose?
Because they wanted you to think that you came from apes and that you're nothing and that you're never going to ascend. They have to keep the prehistoric dialogue alive. Although it's all in our curriculums, our children grow up learning and reading about it, and we all subconsciously are believing that we came from apes. Whereas you can't prove that even with the skulls, because they leave out half the skulls to, you know, it's very biased, a very biased
Well,
opinion. Why do they
um,
leave out, you know, all the giant skulls?
here's the problem with all of that. Um, we human beings cannot live if we evolved from apes or from lizards or pigs or whatever. If we evolved from them, then we would have all the attributes, right? But we don't. We cannot live outside without a roof. We need to have a roof over our head. Even in the tropics, it rains for 4 or 5 straight days. You will die of exposure. I've been there, I've seen it. Okay. You can't eat food that isn't cooked in a fire. Okay. But you can't. We can't. We can't survive without fire. Can't survive without a roof over our head. Most humans on Earth can't survive without clothing. Uh, 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 we are not from here, or we are not created from an animal. It's both of those, probably. And so we're not from here, or we do not have. We need so many special things to stay alive that we could not have evolved from an ape. It's impossible. We would had been able to stay outside. We would have evolved all of those traits. Instead, if we go outside, we'll get cataracts from too much sun. If you're white, you'll burn in the sunshine. Why haven't we evolved our skin to have be able to take any amount of sunlight that we want to take, right? But we can't. And over and over and over, you look and you see that there's something really wrong with the evolutionary narrative.
Well, the way I see it as well, Jay, I agree with you. But the way I see it as well is that they painted this picture of people in caves that had clubs fending off bears that were going to kill
Right.
them. And they created this awful situation where your life was always in danger. We could have come here and created beautiful natural shelters, and we could have been aligned with the animals and around us. And
Well, I think
we
we
don't
were.
know. We don't know. It might have been beautiful, but the reason they had to sell it that way is so that they could sell their wares at the and vacuum cleaners and all these things at the fairs to make you think that you just come so far. You know,
Yes.
we're so advanced.
Yeah. I
That's why they
totally
were doing
agree. And that's why they show the primitive people at the same fairs.
that.
Say,
And
this is
then
what you were, and this, but now you're this big, highly evolved person that has a vacuum cleaner, and you're amazing.
the great belittling and bedazzling is what I call it.
Yep.
So then what they did was they threw in Darwinism to back up their little skull. They basically had all the money in the world to send their little priest scouts out, like Teilhard de Chardin, Brule, and so on, running around all over the world trying to hunt down the missing link and the Holy Grail. Probably they were probably looking for both, and so they had that. With in Darwin's Origin of the Species was 1859,
Yep.
and The Descent of Man, think about that title for a minute,
Yep.
was in 1871. We're much closer to the cave findings.
Right.
So now they had their institutionalized academia book to back up the cave paintings and the archaeological skull finds. But the biggest reason they wanted the cave paintings was because it proved in their minds, it would prove to us that we were hunting animals, and there was our clothing, and there was our food. And so that's how, and then the handprints, see a 5-digit hand on the cave. It has to be humans, you know what I mean? So that's why they had to have that to polish their story.
And you point out that that as soon as the cave art was discovered, it began deteriorating.
Right.
After
Very quickly.
30,000 years sitting in a cave in perfect, pristine condition, which, by the way, as a former spelunker, that is a person who explores caves, I can tell you that I find it very difficult to believe that anything could stay on a cave wall for 30,000 years. I just do. It's so moist in these caves. And I mean, it's not a pleasant place. And also, caves are usually, created by water erosion. Too much rain will come and fill up the whatever the lake is above the caves, and then they'll spill down through the lake or the reservoir down into the mountain and goes down through the cave systems. That's what they're dangerous. And so even that's what you got when you pointed that out. I really started thinking you were onto something there.
Yeah. Well, the most recent ice age, I forget how many thousands of years it was, but even that would have destroyed the work. And it's paint, it's magnesium oxide and stuff on the wall. It's not like it's fused really into the wall. It's on the surface. And even the magnesium oxide itself is 150 miles away in the Pyrenees Mountains from Lascaux caves. So it just goes on and on and on, Jay. It's just, just try to break it down. And you just see right away that it's a big lie.
So
And so,
is this like the secret society in France, or the Prieuré du Sion? You know about them? The Priory of Sion?
I've heard of the Priory of Sion.
Yeah, well, they're kind of like Da Vinci was supposed to be in it, Jean Cocteau, and all these supreme artists are in this secret society that seems somehow connected with Nicolas Flamel and the alchemical traditions of France. And they, I just wonder if your three guys there aren't, sub members of that
Oh,
French
I'm gonna
secret
have to look that
society.
up. I'm
Yeah,
gonna have to look that up. I missed
yeah.
that one, Jay. You got me.
Yeah,
I missed
and also is Father around that same area is Rennes Chateau with the priest there who has found Templar stashes and was working secretly for the church. And so there's all this strange stuff going on in the south of France, northern Spain. Of course, that's also where the monument that I looked at, the Cross of Henday, is also located in that same exact area. So we're
Wow.
talking about an area that is like replete with all sorts of occult mysteries. And Mary Magdalene supposedly came there after the death of Jesus, and there's a church there dedicated to Mary Magdalene. I've been there, and
In St. Balm. It's in St. Balm.
yeah, right.
Well, I don't believe for 1 minute that is her church. That church and the skull encased in gold. Did you
Yeah,
see that?
I did.
That's got Roman Catholic fingerprints all over it. I don't think that's her at all. In fact, I think I found her. I think I know where she comes from.
Well, also there are some grottos that are dedicated to her somewhere down there too. I don't know if that's associated with it or not.
It is the cliffs of St. Balm, these
That's it.
huge cliffs.
That's it. Yeah.
And I overlook the ocean and it looks great, but it's so male. But the place that I found is I think it's Mary Magdalene's the place where she would obviously have had to run away and hidden and
Right.
not be because they would have definitely killed her.
Yeah.
And so I believe her place was Abri de Madeleine, because when they first found this skeleton, they said it was a man. So there's your first clue. Then they came back and said it was a girl. So then you go, oh no, that can't be Mary Magdalene because that she was old when she died. And then you go, Then they find out, oh no, she was a woman. She was older. And this takes, 40 years, 50 years down the line. And then you find out that when they found her body, it was in a fetal shape. But when they displayed her at the Field Museum, there were tens of thousands of people went to see it, and they displayed her on her back. And to me, that has connotations because they always believed that Mary Magdalene was the harlot.
Right.
Another reason I think it was her is because they named the archaeological site Handkerchief. You know that famous Othello story where it's all about the handkerchief and the wife that was supposed to have cheated on her husband. So that you find these Illuminati type
Yeah.
symbolisms running all the way through it.
Right.
And then the cherry on the top is they took that particular skull from Abri de Madeleine and they had it modeled to go into Lasso as from the Magdalenian culture to portray a prehistoric woman. In other words, they bombed Mary back to the Stone Age.
And then they named the era after her.
Right. I think they subconsciously did name it after her because those priests were responsible for naming all the different cultures. With
Right.
the
And
archaeologists and the priests got together and they decided what all the different names of all the cultures would be.
so then you're basically saying that the church and its agents were working right with the Illuminati to foment this narrative of
Absolutely.
yeah,
But undercurrent, you would never know it.
yeah,
And then when Lasso was discovered in 1940, remember that the Second World War had just broken out in 1939. So
right,
who's going to go running around verifying caves right at that point in time when this World War was started,
yeah.
So they knew they had to keep it on the down low this time and, let it get established, which they did. And then that's when all the problems started with the paint fading and human breath destroying all the art.
Yeah, that's
And
funny. That's
they
funny.
had to.
All the gases and strange odors and things that are in caves, and it's human CO2, I guess. That's the culprit for destroying the cave
Right. I
painting.
mean, absolutely. Like the cow farts are nothing by comparison.
Get those people out of there. And
So
of
now
course,
they
now it's impossible for someone like you, an art historian, to go into those caves and maybe take a little sample and date it, maybe find out what it is.
can't
And
you can't touch anything. You're
can't
not
touch
allowed to take
anything.
your cell phone inside. And if you do manage to get in, it's by lottery on the day. They'll pick the person who can go in. And it's very,
And
very
there's no cave paintings anywhere on Earth done by indigenous people that are anything like these paintings. I mean,
right. And you can trace the tribe back to where they came from. They're
yeah,
still around. It wasn't
yeah,
like 65,000 years in the
yeah.
past. And also the paintings were done in the light where you still had light in the
Yeah, what's the
caves and
point of doing a painting in the dark?
and these caves, some of them miles, a mile long at least. So you're walking into a place that has leopards and bears, and you're not going to do that. And suddenly get this creative urge in the middle of it.
The darkest, dankest place that you can find is where you're going to put your art for everybody to see. They'll argue, and they have. The anthropologists will say, "Oh no, these were places of ritual," and they would bring them but I'm not sure
That's
there. I don't think there's really much evidence for a lot for fire damage, is there, on the ceilings?
I don't think so. No, but
No,
and
it
they were
would.
using carved out shells or stones with animal fat in some
Yeah.
moss, and that was their light. But I don't see that lasting that long anyway.
But that would leave lots of fat up on the ceiling, just like above your stove where you
Yeah,
cook,
right.
right? It would leave a ton of it up there, and it would calcify after a while. You should be able to
Well,
find it.
imagine breathing. If you've got a big fire and you want a lot of light, then you've got all that smoke, and then how do you breathe?
Exactly. So they had brought in, you think it was the artist friend of the Prince of Monaco that did it? You think he might be the culprit?
Well,
And they used electric lights, brought him in, probably battery powered at the time, or you could have used cords. And they did it and they faked it. And is there any monetary rewards for these guys?
no, it definitely was never about money. I mean, Louis
I guess
Tenet,
when you're the Prince of Monaco, you don't have to worry.
and Louis Tenet was his close friend, so he went on all his travels. I mean, he got reimbursed finally for what he did. But there was a Hungarian scientist, oh no, Hungarian artist who was working on the replica of the Lasso caves, and he figured out that you could tell by the lines, the way they were painted, they start off thin and then they get thicker. And he figured out the whole sequence of how the work was done. And in particular, the four horses at Chauvet Cave.
Right.
And he said that it's so congruous and everything that it's only possible that this one artist did it.
Did the whole
And then
cave?
that Chauvet, yeah.
Okay,
And
so let's
then
get this straight. I just want to make sure everybody understands. This guy did a really close examination. He's an artist of the cave paintings. And after doing a close examination, he concluded that only one artist could have done the entire thing.
yeah.
Wow. That kind of nails it right there because that's not the party line at all. The party line is that they were done by several different people over years at a time.
Well, that was Chauvet. In Lasso, they say there's certain areas where different things happened at different times. But you see, the thing is, anybody can wander into a cave with a stone in their hand and start scratching on the walls or pick up a piece of charcoal and do this and that around it at any point in time. And they use this system of dating that's so unreliable, and it changes so much when you look at all the records of all the caves and you see the dates and how much they change. It's completely radiocarbon dating is completely unreliable. And
I don't
some
know how you how would you do radiocarbon dating? It's not well, I guess it is organic. No, yeah, I
well,
guess it.
what they'll do is they might find a tooth somewhere in the cave and they'll date
Um,
that, and they'll say, oh, well, here's the evidence of the human that was there, so this must have been the artist. I mean, it's just
Wait a
not
minute.
right.
That
But
that could not actually be because radiocarbon dating is the amount of radiation coming in, and you're in a cave, and if you're in the cave for the last 26,000 years, you're not getting it, or you're getting very little. So I don't think that doesn't make much sense. But I agree with you. Radiocarbon dating, I have lots of problems with it.
and then the other huge part about verifying whether or not these cave paintings are real is that um, there was I forget what his name, Edward Dryden or something. He figured out how animals move and the animals gait in
Right.
the 1800s, right when Louis Tenet was doing his art. And then somebody else came along, and I'm so sorry I don't remember all these scientists' names. If I had my notes, I could give you them. But there was another scientist that looked at over 10,000 different paintings of art of people who had drawn animals, and he looked at their gaits, and came to the conclusion that over 70% of people cannot get this animal gate right. It's always wrong. And you go look at it
Yeah,
yourself.
because it wasn't until they did that photography in the 1800s of animals running in front of cameras, they could finally see that sometimes a horse, all four hooves are off the ground, and things that you can't see with the human eye because it's going too fast.
Right. So somebody went along and looked and studied the gaits of the animals that have been painted in the caves. And guess what, Jay? The
They got the
gate was
gate
always
right.
correct.
Yeah. Oh,
So that's another big giveaway.
yeah.
And
They
there's
are awfully
probably
good
more.
painting. They are awfully well painted, I must
They're
say.
beautiful. They're beautiful. And
Yeah.
Picasso went to see them, and he when he came out of the cave, his comment was, "All is decadence." And I think he knew. I think he knew what was going on. And there's a picture of him with his hand over one eye. I think he
Yeah.
was part of that club, you
Oh,
know?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, how could those paintings sell for that much? Come on. I'm sorry, but I'm just not a big modern art fan. Um, so that is a strange statement. I wonder what he meant by that.
I
Um,
think he knew that they were so decadent. They would just put this out there just like that and lie to such a degree. But as
sure.
an artist, he could absolutely see that it was modern art.
Yeah,
That's what I think.
I think
And
you're.
what happened was they ended up taking the lasso, and they didn't just do one replica. They did four replicas, and one of them was a traveling replica that went all over the world, Chicago, Asia, all over the world, just like a little mini World Fair,
Oh
carrying
my
on the
goodness.
tradition of taking it out there and getting it out to the masses, you know? And
And also, this is sending a message that because we're right at the time when modern art is beginning to emerge on the scene, and so it also this is sending a message to art connoisseurs that um, humans have always been painting stuff like this. Look at these paintings in the caves. They're all abstract. They're not realistic. Like, you know, like we're against. They were literally against realism in art. They thought it was a horrifying thing. And so that actually would help solidify that too, right?
exactly. And another thing, like right across the pond in England, there's they found some prehistoric art, and it's the first and only cave art that's ever discovered in Britain, called Cresswell Crags. It's 13,000 years old, but you can't even make out what it is unless you draw it to show somebody what it actually looked like. And so that's all they have there in England. That's it. But France is just crazy art just all over the place, you know?
Yeah, that is odd. And the fact that it was all, I mean, nothing's really was discovered before that. I mean, people have been going into caves for thousands of years, you know, exploring
Exactly.
caves or chasing an
Yeah.
animal in a cave that got in a cave or whatever. It seems kind of actually hard to believe, first off, that they weren't discovered earlier by some peasant who, you know, I would believe that they probably would have to have been, or um, but the big thing that you've got on your side is the deterioration. They would have been horrifyingly deteriorated if they were 30,000 years old. You would have to have exactly what you just described. I know somebody come in and show you what you're looking at because you wouldn't be able to see it because everything would have deteriorated. That's the number one thing that's on your side in this narrative is that, and now they can't let anybody in. They got to do replicas because if they let anybody in, supposedly the CO2 is going to make the art disappear. Okay.
Well, yeah, I know it's a big claim. Don't you worry. I had many sleepless nights before I decided to put this out here because there's so much invested in these lasso caves, especially with all the reproductions. They've got tens of thousands of people constantly lining up to go through and
Sure.
look and see how dumb they used to be. And that's part of the whole ritual.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know, that's what it's all about. that energy signature.
Right, right. Very interesting. Very interesting. So that is just more proof that the timelines have been messed with, and everything's just the church is just involved in all of this messing with the timelines.
And not only that, after the war, or 1944 it was, they flew this Nazi plane in circles over the Montségur Cathar Castle ruins in the shape of a swastika. So that again shows you the determination to ritualize everything, and their investment in the fact that the Cathars were the true spiritual people, and the Roman Catholic was only Christian in name only.
Right.
And they adopted and stole many of the Cathars' rituals, placing
Yep.
hands on the head and all of these things. They just stole it from them. And today we have absolutely no idea the depth of their spirituality, and encompassing the tree of life within the body, and no tithing, and none of the no materialism. They were pushing the materialism through these world fairs, and this non-materialistic spiritual body of humans was beginning to encroach upon their territory and take it over, and they had to kill it every means possible. So they did the whole Darwin skull archaeological thing with the cave paintings to back it up. And that's what I think they were doing ultimately.
Do you think it's possible that they were also destroying Cathar holy places that were still left behind?
Oh, absolutely. They would have destroyed them and burned them and done everything they could to get rid of them. There's this, I call it the satanic and synthetic, or the gnostic organic. That's how I
Right.
break it up,
Nice.
because that's when the whole world turned into this materialistic frenzy. And there's and in the UNESCO came from the United Nations, and it's United Nations Educational and Scientific something, whatever it is. And then below that they have something called the World Heritage Center. And so under this World Heritage place, in their logo, it says Patrimonio Mundial, which means ownership of the commons. And there's this word mondial, and I looked up this mundi part, and it's Rex Mundi is
Yeah.
about this evil god that
The king of
wants
the
to take
world.
over the, yeah.
Yeah.
And then Rex Deus is the beautiful god that is very spiritual and loving and caring for humanity and all of that. So they've got this mundi in their logo, which is a circle with a square in it, the square within the circle. And so under UNESCO, now what's happening is, now that was founded in 1945, right after the Second World War.
Yes, it was.
To me, both those wars represent a continuation of the Crusades. And so now finally the UNESCO logo looks like the a Roman building. It looks like the Acropolis.
Yep.
And so what this is, Roman 2.0, Roman Empire 2.0, when now,
Yep.
under the guise of protecting everything in the world, like thousands and thousands of the most beautiful sites in the world, the Galapagos Islands, and just think of all the beautiful places that you've ever, much Picchu, buildings, everything, that all under their jurisdiction now. So maybe they say they don't own it, and maybe they say they're protecting it, but they're accumulating it under that. So on the macro level now, they're beginning to inventorize and gather together everything under their wings, so that they can own it all, and us, obviously, that
Yep.
we know they want to own our body, minds, and soul, because under unum sanctum, they allowed that to go through. So that's the big picture, because also all of these caves are part of the World Heritage. And so they police them. So of course, again, you can't go in there and check or see or verify or do anything without their permission.
I know you're right because I was writing my first book on the Cross of Henday, and of course, one of the messages was that the place of refuge in the coming catastrophe was the Inca caves in Cusco, Peru. So I went there in '97 and actually got into the Andean tunnel system that looks like it was built by humans. And
Wow.
I wrote about it. My book came out 3 years later. I wrote all about, how I got into the Andean tunnel system, and there's amazing, clearly built by humans or intelligences. And then in 2007, I came back to Peru to make a documentary, and revisited all the caves, and there were either grates, iron grates over the mouth of the caves, or there were actually armed guards with guns, making sure that
Wow.
nobody got into the caves. And I felt terrible because I thought maybe I had been responsible, right? Because I'd written it in my book
Oh, wow. Yeah.
for like bringing the heat down on it. But then I learned that it was UNESCO that was patrolling all of this for Peru. So they were giving money to the very poor government of Peru, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I'll take your millions of dollars." And I don't know why you want to make sure nobody gets in the cave system, but sure, go ahead, right? They didn't care, and they're still there. I was there in 2017, or yeah, 2017, and they were still there. Actually, there was a bigger presence there than ever, and I think this is happening everywhere. They're scooping up everything. They don't want us to see it. They're making, under the guise of protection, they're making sure that we can't get in to investigate anything.
Well, speaking to that exact thing, another very interesting connection that I made was that the Gospel of Mary was found in 1897, 1897, but it was only brought to the attention of the masses in 1983. So they hid that. They hid Mary's Gospels from us so that we wouldn't know what they said and what she believed about the equality of men and women and no tithing, no usury, and all of this stuff that the Roman Catholic Church wanted to do. They hid it from us because and they kind of nipped everything in the bud with this whole prehistory story, because
Yep.
when they found it, that's really 1897, that's when they really went into high gear with the whole prehistoric narrative, including
They did.
Darwin and the
Yep.
skull findings and the cave paintings and all of that.
Yep.
And then that lasted, we have to wait until almost, what was that? Gosh, almost 100 years to find out about the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. So
Yeah.
they knew, and they were ready, and they were poised to nip it in the bud. So it's true, they don't want us sniffing around anywhere that gives us any idea of what I would never know anything if the internet didn't exist, honestly.
What's very interesting is that my grandmother, her name was Mary Magdalene, and going then that sparked me to go look back at her family's history, and I found a number of Mary Magdalenes going back to, even to my great 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 grandmother was named Mary Magdalene. Then I looked even further when I found this out, uh, and I found that they were my family. Their family was wealthy. They were from the Alsace-Lorraine region, and they had built over 40 churches dedicated to Mary Magdalene over the last 700 years.
Wow.
Yep. I have no idea.
So
I had no idea. And here's the thing, I didn't know her name was that until she died. And I saw it on the gravestone. She was just grandma, right? I had no
wow,
idea that was
it's
her name. And I
amazing.
was very mature and into all of this when she died. And I looked down and I saw it and I just about fell over, right? That my grandmother had this name, and she was actually probably the most saintly, kind person I'd ever known in my whole life, right? And I say all this because I did a past life regression a long time ago, and I was a Cathar, and I remember being persecuted and eventually dying from torture. I was tortured by some Catholic priests who they kept asking me questions, and I didn't even know what the questions were. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And they thought I was lying, and they eventually killed me. Another story, but yeah, I have a whole affinity for that region too. Been there many
I'm
times, and
sure that our past lives are the things that make us do what we do.
I agree. That's why we call it
And
research.
exactly, yeah, researching. Exactly. When I was looking at Louis Tenaire, I found one portrait of him, and I just found myself getting lost and just staring at him. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've seen him somewhere before. And then I remembered I had done a past life reading, and I had been an artist in France during the time of the Impressionists. And I feel like I had met him. I know it's weird, but you just know these things.
When I was in France and I was taking the book by Fulcanelli, Dwellings of the Philosophers, which is a book about alchemists, famous alchemist houses where they lived in France. And he says it's really important to go see these because there's all sorts of stuff there. So I went and did it. I did a whole tour of all these houses. And I went to a house of an alchemist named Jacques Coeur in Bourges in central France. And a beautiful house, incredible house with all this ornate stuff. It was just like this most incredible place. And as I'm walking out, uh, uh, my friend who was with me goes, Jay, that's you. And I look up and there's a statue of Jacques Coeur. And oh my God, just I fell over. It was exactly looked just like me. And I thought, oh my God, how weird.
How do you
And
spell the last name? I want to look at him.
Couer, Coeur means heart, Jack of Hearts, right? Jacques
Oh,
Coeur.
wow.
Yeah, the Jack of Hearts. So, and he was killed, by the way, by King Charles II, I think, killed him for treason because he wouldn't give over the alchemical formulas to the king. So the king had him tortured and killed him and made up a reason for what he did and everything. But Jacques Coeur, uh, he looked like he was 20 years old all the way up until he died when he was 60. So he's an interesting guy. But yeah, so what I think in my own view, what I think the Cathars were pretty much exactly what you said, a highly advanced spiritual people who were in command and had powers that we can only dream of. We have the same powers, but we've let our powers atrophy, and they did not. In fact, that's what the consolamentum was, and all of these practices were designed to enliven the chi within them, and that's what the hands-on healing is about, and all of it. And they were vegetarians and didn't believe in killing at all, which is why they just got run right over by the Catholic armies until finally they sort of fought back, but not really. They just kept running. Finally, they got caught in Mount Segur, and the last 200 or 300 of them were killed in a giant fire that they burned the whole place down. And I've been to Mount Segur. I actually walked all the way up to that hill and got to the top.
Wow.
Beautiful there. South of France is probably one of the most beautiful places on earth, by the way. I think that's another reason the Catholics came in there. They were trying to steal the place.
Right. And the even though the Cathars, like, they occupied the Languedoc, but they never owned it.
No,
And the
never owned it.
Catholic Church couldn't stand it. But that because the Catholic Church had to own it, they had to own everything.
Yeah, that's why they lost the debate at Arles. Because the Cathar who was debating kept saying, "Why do you have all these expensive clothes on?" Right? We don't have these expensive clothes on. Why do you? Why do you need this big, huge church with all this stuff in it? Right? We don't need that. We can just go to a grove of trees and have our worship. Right? And the church didn't know what to say. I don't know how to answer these charges. Right? So They just said,
Well,
screw it.
that church that Mary Magdalene is said to have been in, that you went to visit with the golden case skull, the audaciousness
Right.
of it, that church was built in 1294, so it was even built too late for it to ever have been Mary Magdalene's church. But the place that I think she was occupied during the Middle Ages. So I really do think that. Also, there was a horse engraved into the cave wall behind the where she was buried. And when you look up the meaning of a horse in Christianity, one of the words that comes up is resurrection.
Right.
So there's just so many different clues that make me think that that was Mary that was there.
Well, I think
But
it might have been, and I'm sure the church is running interference on this whole thing, making sure that we don't find it out. The last thing they want is, to find out that. But Da Vinci knew, because in the Last Supper, he's got Mary as definitely a favored above all the other apostles, and so he knew, and there was a couple other artists who seemed to know the truth about what really happened, and are being very discreet in their paintings and not giving you clues without telling you overtly what's going on. Probably because they're afraid the church will come in and kill them.
so would you like me to round this out now, or do we have any
Yep.
more time, or are you running it out
Let's
now?
round it out.
Because I did want to add that then they brought in social Darwinism, which justified all the survival of the fittest and all of that. I had to throw that in there because that ties in with the industrial revolutions, the world fairs, and this whole this was the birth of BlackRock, is basically what it was.
Right.
And one of the most recent world fairs was an expo in Astana in 2017. And Astana is that super Illuminati town in Kazakhstan. And then right during the same year, they find now the world's oldest caves ever in Indonesia. So it's all tied in. It just keeps on repeating and getting tied into one into the other. And also, I was telling you about the logo of the World Heritage with the square within the circle. And if you go and look at the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, you'll see it looks exactly like a pedophile symbology. And when you get that pedophile symbology and you place it over the World Heritage symbol, they overlap except for one line in the very middle, which is a triangle. So there's all these correlations between pedophilia, the World Heritage, and the logos. I encourage people to go and look at all their logos, especially the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, which was in 2003. And then another really interesting thing I found, that this psychopathogenesis of man goes through generations, because we had Thomas Henry Huxley was like Darwin's bulldog when he
Yep.
first put his book out. And then his two grandsons, one was Aldo, who wrote Brave New World, and the other one was the very first director of UNESCO, Julian
Julian, yeah.
Huxley. So you see this interconnectedness through the generations of keeping it going and promoting it.
Definitely, it's generational.
And then another little trick they do is they'll bring these great art movements into the future. Like, for instance, there was a cave painting thing, cave painting in Britain recently, where modern history was reimagined as ancient cave art, including COVID-19 and Brexit and Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And they did that during the Renaissance. They took Raphael and they said, oh, no, he didn't die of syphilis. He died of an upper respiratory problem, and it was very much related to COVID or COVID-19. So they take that. If we could only just realize the magnanimous impact of visual art on our lives, and every second of every day we're taking in these subliminal images, and you ask somebody how important they think art is, and they'll just have like a blank stare, and they'll say, oh, I can't even draw a stick figure. And somehow the whole populace is completely anesthetized against realizing the power and the strength and the huge effect visual art has on our evolutionary process toward ascension. It's always being pushed down by every visual that we see, and that we really do need to reclaim our creation currency and use it for our own positive evolution and stop giving it away to them.
Amen. I believe you are right. That's exactly how I feel. It's time for us to regain our innate creativity. It's time to not reject technology, but put it in its place. And we control the technology. It does not control us. And we need to uh, put a moratorium on AI research until we got a better handle on it. And that's all I gotta
Absolutely.
say.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep. All right, Jane. I really like what you have to say, and you're always so interesting. And my audience really likes you and kept requesting you to come back, and then you did, and so here we are. And thank you.
Well, there's so much more I'd love to say, but I know we're out of time.
Well, we'll have you back. We're going to keep
Thank
going.
you for having me so
Yeah,
much.
I
I
want to hear
really
more
enjoyed
about
it.
it too.
I think you're amazing, Jay. You're wonderful to talk to.
Well, thank you. I think you're amazing too. All right, everybody. I am Jay Weidner, and this is Reality Check. We've been with Jane Evershed, and she is an amazing artist. I'll put a link to her site. You can read her stuff and see her videos, and just think about what she's saying, because it's true. And you can, if you're depressed or you don't know what to do with your life, take up something creative. I really think it'll help you out. I really do. We can fight back against the demoralization that they are all constantly putting us under 24/7. Remember,
But
they
it's coming
want,
to an end.
yep, they want you to be um, dumb and quiet. All right? Don't do it. All right. Thank you, everybody.